Hello landlords, it's Ernie Garcia, your landlord attorney, and today we're talking all about the good and the bad of adding a new person to your lease. Let's get started.
Come on, turn the radio on. It's Friday.
So from time to time I get asked, is it a good idea to add somebody to a lease? You've already got something good going, and the tenant comes up and says, look, something's changed, something's come up, and I'd really like to add this person to my lease. What do you do? Well, it's going to depend on a number of factors, and today I'm going to give you 5 good reasons and 5 not so good reasons why you should pull the trigger and add this person to your lease. So the first good reason has to do with the justification that you now have to increase the rent. If you've got a situation where you've got a lease and a tenant who wants to invite a new person in, you have every justification to include in this modified lease an increase in rent. Remember that the fact that another person is there means that the landscape has changed and the use of the property will now be different. And because of that, you have every reason to modify the lease to include this extra person. If this is something that your tenant really wants, then they may be willing to pay extra for it. So Ernie, are you telling me it's always a good reason to add someone else to a lease? Of course not. Here's one reason why I wouldn't recommend doing it. It's more work for you. Now, in the middle of a tenancy, you've got to do another background check, and you got to dig around and make sure that the person that is being added is somebody you'd otherwise welcome into the lease. Now, sometimes, just sometimes, once you've already got something established, you're not as active and you're not as likely to do a thorough job. If you know that about yourself, recognize that if you let somebody in with a minimal check, you might be welcoming in a problem. Naturally, you would avoid this hassle by simply not accepting the new tenant. The next reason you might be willing to modify your lease to add another person onto your lease is simply to avoid the possibility of a default. If you know that Susie tenant has been welcoming her guest repeatedly throughout the month in violation of your lease, exceeding the number of days that you otherwise allow a guest to stay there without written authorization from you, you can sidestep the whole idea of breach by modifying the lease to include this person if that's what the tenant now wants. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend convincing someone to do this, but if they're going to break the lease anyway, you may as well get the name of this person on paper and get them signed up if that's something you're going to allow anyway. This way you can completely avoid the need to have to file a lawsuit for eviction because technically the tenant is in breach. You would also have a more stable tenant at this point, someone who knows they're not in breach because they have cleared that breach with you on a permanent basis. Second reason why it might not be a good idea to do it is if your situation is one where you have, say for example, 2 roommates, and it makes sense to allow one additional person. So that roommate gets a romantic partner and you say, fine, we'll add them to a lease, but no one else. Well, you might create a situation in your tenancy where the other roommate, the other original roommate then says, hey, I found myself a romantic partner and now I want to add them to the lease. And because your unit simply can't maintain a group that size, you may end up creating a situation that sours the relationship with one of your tenants and ultimately causes a problem between you and them. The fact is, if you cannot universally allow this, you may not want to do it at all. If one person asks and you have to reject the other, you have to understand that you're likely going to sour an otherwise good relationship. Third good reason has to do with loyalty. You may find that extending this courtesy to your tenants improves your connection with them and establishes a loyal now set of tenants who are willing to pay your monthly rent and are going to do it for a while. You may have in the past only leased this particular property to a single person, but people's situations change all the time. And because of that, this same single person, if their new friend cannot be added to the lease may not stick around. In fact, they may terminate the lease early so that they can be with the person they want to be with, especially if, for whatever reason, you're not allowing it in the middle of this lease. By being willing to modify your lease to include another tenant, you may create loyalty that lasts for years. Landlords, I hope you're enjoying this video. Hit the like button if you are. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. Third bad one. What if you're just picking up someone else's problem? This person out of the blue needs a place to stay. That's almost never a good situation. It's very rare that some great tenant just gets up and says, I want to be someone else's great tenant. It's more likely that this person has been kicked out of wherever they previously were. If they all of a sudden need accommodations, don't be the one caught holding the bag here, right? This is why background checks are good, but background checks don't catch everything. Consider thoroughly whether or not it makes sense for you to pick up another tenant, because you might just be picking up someone else's headache. Fourth good reason has to do with having someone else on the hook. So in the legal business, we always look for as many people as we can blame as possible. And so as a practical matter, having more names on a lease means you have more pockets from which to derive your rent. You have more people that you could potentially sue if things go sideways. The fact is, if there are more people on the hook, you have a higher degree of being able to collect, even if that new person isn't the one ultimately who caused the issue in question. The fact that they are all equally liable on this lease means that any new person increases your likelihood of being able to collect on that liability. Fourth bad reason, wear and tear. The likelihood that you're going to experience more wear and tear on your property goes up with every person who comes through that door. The fact that another person is going to be there means that the percentage of damage to your property will increase. And remember, normal wear and tear is not something that you can deduct from a security deposit. The fact that the unit is being used by one additional person means ultimately you will lose out in value. Now, granted, it may not be an astronomical amount, but you do have to consider the fact that additional wear and tear on your property means you will have to pay money later that the tenants don't have to compensate you for. If it's normal use, you're on the hook for that. Last good reason why it might work out for you to have a new tenant on your lease, it could just be an issue of safety. There is something to having more people in a unit to improve the quality of the safety in the unit. Different people feel differently about living with other people, and sometimes people are much more comfortable with a larger number of people in the same household. If that's the case for your tenants and you're perfectly comfortable allowing it, that increased safety might make a happier tenant. A happier tenant might make for a better tenancy, and a better tenancy should lead to more money. Now, the fifth reason why you may not want to welcome a new person onto the lease, especially if this is a romantic partner. We know that most of these romantic relationships will eventually come to an end. They don't always last forever. But the other issue is the possibility that goes up whenever two partners are together is the possibility of some kind of dispute, some kind of complicated situation that is now part of your lease. More often than not, a single person who's got single people problems handles their single people problems on their own. But when it's two people, you've got double the problems. And by welcoming in another party who is not an original party to the lease, you increase the possibility that there's going to be drama. If you're fine with that, or you've dealt with this in the past and have no problem with it now, then by all means, do what you want. But if you've had a good situation going for a while, and now you've got a new thing that might mess it up, you might really consider saying no if your tenant wants to introduce some unknown variable. You have every right to reject a request to modify your lease. Ultimately, the parties are bound by what they signed originally. However, if you are interested in a change, make sure always that you get it in writing. Don't ever modify the terms of release purely on a verbal or oral way. It's not going to stick, it's not enforceable, and ultimately you may be inviting more trouble than preventing. As always, you will see us here every single week, multiple times a week, bringing new content to you for your educational enjoyment. I hope you are learning tons from the videos. There's a video here that YouTube seems to believe that you will enjoy and learn lots from. Also, there's a picture of me. If you have not yet subscribed, click on that picture and be one of our many subscribers. And until next time, landlords, happy leasing.